Rancher's Homestead. Welcome back to the channel. Okay, so today is our long-awaited day of gluten-free sourdough bread. And we are so excited. I am so excited to get this finally out to you. You won't believe the amount of messages and comments and things, some people asking me, do you do sourdough? Can you do a gluten-free sourdough? And I'd always have to say, yes, I do, but it's not perfect yet, and I'm not sharing it yet. I'm still working on it. And now I can actually share it, and I'm so excited about that. Okay, so before we get started on bread, we are the day before we are going to make bread. So the day before you want to make any kind of sourdough bread, you do need to feed your starter. And if you have not started a starter yet, you do need to jump to that video, get your sourdough starter made and going and active. And so that'll be your first step in doing that, and I will drop a link in the description on that so you can get your sourdough starter going, but you do need to get that going. But before we feed our starter, I wanted to talk about a little bit of equipment and the flours that you're going to use to make your bread. So the first piece of equipment that I use to make my bread is this stand mixer. Now, if you don't have a stand mixer, I know they're expensive, so don't think you can't make bread. You can use a hand mixer. However, just a spoon and a bowl is not going to work. So you do need some form of better power than just your own elbow grease for gluten-free. The bread dough in gluten-free is just going to be different than your bread dough in regular bread. Without the gluten, it's going to look different, it's going to feel different. And so the mixers really, really help to get it whipped and light and airy and fluffy. I have never done it with a hand mixer. I've made my other bread with a hand mixer and it's worked. I've only ever done it with a stand mixer, so I can't really say if one is better than the other, but I would assume that the hand mixer is going to do the same job as this, except for this you don't have to sit and do it yourself. So it's going to do the work for you. If you are someone that is really interested in making gluten-free breads often, I would highly recommend investing in one of these. This is the workhorse of my kitchen. I do everything with it. Even making my gluten-free pasta with the pasta attachment. It runs at least once a day. At least. Sometimes quite a bit more. So this is a definite something on your wish list that you would want if you're going to really dive into cooking from scratch gluten-free, because it is something you'll use often. If you've already followed my gluten-free sourdough starter video, then you already should have one of these, but you are going to need a digital scale to make your bread. So it's just not possible to make a good non-dense product measuring by cups. You've got to have a scale, and we measure by grams. So a digital scale, kitchen scale, is a must. They're super cheap. I'll drop this link in the description, but honestly, any kitchen scale will work. You just want to be able to use it by grams, because that's how my recipe goes. A dough scraper is another tool that you're going to need that is highly important. I guess it's not highly important, but it does help. So once you get to the point where your bread is made in this, you're going to dump it out onto a well-floured surface. And so this really just helps to scoop it up and get it into your bowl for rising. Your dough is going to be very sticky. It's not going to be like a regular dough, and so that's where this comes in handy to get it up and off of your counter. The last thing that you are going to need is a Dutch oven or cast iron with a lid. I will drop this one. This is just a Lodge brand in the description, but I know plenty of people that just put it in a cast iron pan, and then the pan that sits on top to make as the lid. You're going to bake your bread with the lid on for half the time, and then with off the half of the time. A lid is very important in this, because you will see in the recipe that when you put your bread in for the first time into the oven, we're actually going to drop a couple ice cubes in between the parchment paper and your cast iron or your Dutch oven to make a steam effect. And so the lid is highly important to really get that steam in there, and that's what's going to give you that really nice and crunchy outside. And so without the lid, it's harder to accomplish that. So you can still do it, it's just not as easy. So I highly recommend getting a Dutch oven with a lid, and That is all of the equipment that you need. The 2 flours that you are going to use in your bread is a tapioca flour or starch. They're the same thing. So if you find a company that you always buy from or in your grocery store and it says tapioca starch, that's fine. They're both a starch. Or if it says tapioca flour, they're the same thing. Either one works. So don't get screwed up by the name. And then a white rice flour. So you can use the brown rice flour that we've been feeding our starter if you've been following along on that. But I feel like the white rice gives it just more of a white sourdough bread feel, and it's a little bit more fluffier and lighter. Brown rice flour gives it just a tad different texture, and I think it's just a little bit grainier. Not a bad texture, just different. And my children prefer the white rice flour. You can choose either one. If you don't want to buy an extra flour, I always keep white and brown rice flour on hand, so I always have them, so it's not a huge deal for me to jump back and forth between the two. But if you aren't like me and buy a bunch of flours in bulk, and you just have brown rice flour, you can go ahead and make this with brown rice flour. Some of the other flours that I have tried in this bread is oat flour, buckwheat flour, sorghum flour. I've done a combination of them. They all give you a different product. So in my opinion, and what my family likes, the best is with white rice flour and tapioca starch. But you can experiment, same recipe, just using a different flour as your grain, and see how you like it. So now we are going to feed our starter. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and feed our starter. So you want to make sure that your scale is on grams, and you want to do this, feed your starter, anywhere from 6 to 24 hours ahead of time, depending on the warmth of your kitchen. So I know I'm going to make bread tomorrow morning, and so I am about 11 o'clock right now my time the day before. And so that's fine, and it'll still be nice and active. My kitchen isn't super warm right now as we're in the fall months, and so it might take just a little bit more time in order to get your starter active. So I like to give myself a little extra time. I've also done it where I fed it right before bed and then mixed up my flour the next morning, and it's been fine. In the summertime, when you have a really warm kitchen, you'll find that your starter gets nice and big and bubbly and air pockets and all the good stuff to know that it's active way closer, like 5-6 hours you can do it. It's just going to really depend on the warmth of your kitchen and your starter. So, okay, so I'm going to, just like in the video before with making a sourdough starter, I'm going to discard up to 40 grams, and which is really just like a tablespoon and a half. And scrape it down. And then I'm going to stick it onto my scale. I've got quite the mess here while I was discarding. Make sure that it's at 0, and I'm going to feed it 125 grams of water. Warm water, I should say. And if you haven't watched my video on starting this starter, I just use tap water. I don't do any filtered water. I know sometimes they say that that's not good. I'm on well water. I've never killed my starter using my tap, so I don't think that it's necessary to get distilled or filtered water. Okay, and then I'm going to do 165 grams of sorghum flour. Oh, I almost got that right on with that scoop. It was 63. And you're going to do 65 grams of brown rice flour. I buy my flours in bulk, so I have these big old buckets here on the floor. And all right. Now you're going to take your little spatula, spoon, whatever you're using, and you're going to stir it all up. Make sure it's nice and mixed. I scrape down the sides of my starter. And then you are going to set this aside until tomorrow. Then tomorrow we are going to bake bread with our nice active starter that we'll have. So I'll see you back here tomorrow morning, and we'll get our bread mixed up. Okay, you've made it to bread making day. So just something to remember, here is my active starter. And I'm going to get close to the camera so you can kind of see. Your starter is not going to be like a regular sourdough starter. It's not going to get bubbly and overflowing of your jar. That's just not how gluten-free sourdough starters work. So you're going to see it double in size, and you're going to see lots and lots of air pockets. And that's when you know that it's active. Depending on the warmth of your kitchen will depend on how long that takes. I always just feed mine and let it set for like 12 hours. If I'm in a rush and I really want to try and get some bread going because the whole process does take a while, then I will let it go for like 5 or 6 hours and it still turns out fine. But just think, the more active that your starter is, the better rise you're going to get on your bread. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the bowl of my stand mixer. I'm going to turn my scale on, make sure that it's on grams. And then I'm going to put in 250, I forgot a spoon, 250 grams of your active starter. A little bit too much. Okay, now you have probably enough right here. It might be a little over 40 grams. I wouldn't discard any of that. I would just go right on ahead and feed what's left in the jar, and that'll be fine. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and clear that. And I'm going to put in 340 grams of white rice flour. Now again, you can use any grain flour that's gluten-free. I've tried a number of different ones, and the white rice flour seems to give me the best bread, but feel free to experiment. If you have the brown rice flour from the starter and that's what you want to use, go ahead and use that. I just feel like that gives a little bit more, it's a little heavier, and so it gives just a little bit more of a dense product. This gives a little bit more of a fluffier product. Okay, there's 340, and then I'm going to do 230 of tapioca flour or starch. They're the same thing. So if you find a tapioca starch, go ahead and grab it. If you find a tapioca flour, they're the exact same thing. So 230 grams of this. And I did find, I tried doing like combinations of flours and different things, and I just found the more combination of flour I had, the worse product I got. It just was very dense, and I think it's because of the makeup of the different flours. Keeping it simple seemed to work the best, so I'm all about simple. Okay, so 230. All right. Now you're going to go ahead and clear that, and you're going to go ahead and put 340 grams of warm water. I'm a little bit short there. A little bit too much. This is why it's so important to do it off of weight and not off of cups, because it can always change so much. Okay. Okay, so now you're just going to piece together all your other ingredients. You no longer need your scale. You can set that aside and just have your bowl in here. And I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of honey. going to put in a tablespoon of oil. And I'm just using an avocado oil. You can use whatever oil you carry in your home, olive oil. We try and stay away from any kind of vegetable oils here. So, but if that's what you have in your home, you can go ahead and use that. I'm going to put in 2 eggs. Now, things to remember about gluten-free breads is they are not going to be the same as a regular bread, and you need lots of ingredients to get you a good product. The simplicity of it is pretty simple. There's no kneading, there's none of that, but without all these separate ingredients like eggs and xanthan gum and apple cider vinegar, those are all things that help with your texture. Xanthan gum is your binding agent. Eggs and apple cider vinegar are going to help with your texture, and so you just have to add kind of a little bit more ingredients. But okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put in 4 teaspoons of xanthan gum, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 2 teaspoons of salt. The simplicity of this is that you don't really have to do anything but just add it all together. Alright, and then the last thing is apple cider vinegar, and I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of that. I'm going to stick it in my mixer, and I am going to turn it on. Now at this point, you're just going to let this go for about 2 minutes. You want it to really be whipping it around and getting it nice and mixed and kind of fluffy. So even when it looks like it's mixed, keep it going. Let it just do its work for you. You don't need to knead gluten-free bread dough, but this step really helps it to be light and airy. Okay, so the other thing to remember when you are making your gluten-free breads is that it's going to be very sticky. It is not going to be like a normal bread dough. So you're not really looking for a dough to come together. It will slightly come together. You don't want it to be almost runny, but it's going to be very sticky to the touch. It's going to get all over your hands. So that's kind of the consistency you're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and wet my hands here a little bit just to help and push this down off of here back into my bowl. Okay, and then I have just a glass mixing bowl here and some avocado oil, and I'm going to go ahead and oil my bowl very well. Set that aside. Okay, now you can use a little bit more white flour, or I just have an all-purpose flour here, gluten-free all-purpose flour. I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit onto my counter here. And now I'm going to take this dough and I'm going to put it on my counter. It is very sticky. Very, very sticky, but that is what you want. If it comes together like a dough completely, you're going to have a really dense product. Okay, so now I'm just going to shape it. Now this is going to be your only shaping for this bread. So this is where you want to get it to the shape that you want it. I am just taking it, putting my hands a little bit in the flour. I even, at the end here, I'm kind of just folding it up to make a ball. And I will even wet my hands a little bit to smooth out the top. Like I said, this is the only shaping you're going to give this bread. So you want to make sure it's what you want and kind of to get it as smooth as possible. Wetting your hands helps tremendously. Alright. I'm pretty sure that's how I want it. Kind of tuck the sides. Smoothed it all out. Okay, so now you're going to take, oh I forgot my dough scraper. Now you're going to take your dough scraper and you're going to pick it up and flop it upside down into your bowl. Now you're going to just shape the top, because this is going to be your bottom, and what you just shaped before is going to be your top when you plop it back out of this bowl. So if you need to, wet your hands again. You don't want them sopping wet, but just damp so that you can smooth it out completely. Okay, once you have it nice and smooth, you're going to go ahead and stick a plastic wrap over the top. I just buy these shower caps from Walmart, and you can get like a pack of 20 for 99 cents or something crazy like that. And they are perfect because they fit nice and snug, and I just reuse them over and over and over again. I have one for regular and one for gluten-free, and I just put a GF on the one that I always use for the gluten-free so that it never gets cross-contaminated. And you're just going to let it sit now. It's going to either sit on your counter, or if your house is between like 65 and 70 degrees, you can just let it sit on your counter for 5 or more hours. Or if it's really chilly in your house, because we're getting into the colder months, you can pop it in your oven with just the oven light on and let it rise there. It's just going to take a really long, slow rise, and that's where you're going to get all your air pockets and your air bubbles. And once this has like doubled in size, then we will go ahead and bake it. So that's your first step in getting your dough made, and now it's just going to sit and do its thing all day long. Okay, we've made it to the bake time. So this bread has been rising since about 8:30 this morning, and we are at 4:30 now. So it's pretty much gone all day long. And if you can see, the bread has rose to almost double, and it's touching the shower cap that I have on here, or the plastic wrap. So I know that that's about as high as it's going to get, and it's time to bake. Now you want to be really careful, because you don't want to deflate the bread that has rose all day. But the first thing you're going to do is you're going to turn your oven on to 425, which I have, and then you're going to want to put in your Dutch oven into your oven to preheat with it. Okay, I have my canner cooling down back there. I was canning some chicken broth. Okay, so now you're going to go ahead and take off your wrap, and really, really gently, you want to dump your bread out onto a piece of parchment paper. I love this parchment paper because it's just sheets of parchment paper that lay flat. I get them on Amazon. And you're just going to dump them out. And now you have this beautiful rounded bread here on the top. So now we're going to go ahead and score it. And you can do any design you want. You just want to at least get one big slash in there. I like to do a big slash down the side. And then sometimes I do these little line flowers down the middle. Sometimes I just do an X. Let your creative hearts go. Now, one thing to remember is your dough is very sticky. It's very different than regular sourdough bread. So you want to be kind of gentle with it, because you don't want, you've let it go all day long rising, and you don't want to mess that up. Alright, so now I got it all scored, and we are going to wait for our oven to preheat. Okay, so my oven has preheated, which means my cast iron has preheated. Excuse the different projects going on. I'm canning some bone broth, so my kitchen is small. Okay, so I'm going to take off the lid very carefully. And in this cup right here, I have just about 4 cubes of ice in there. So you're going to need that in just a second. I'm going to take my bread very carefully and place it into my cast iron pot without burning myself, because it's very hot. And then I'm going to take my ice and I'm going to put it in between the pot and the parchment paper. So it's going to touch the pot, but not touch the bread. And I'm going to quickly put my lid back on, and this is going to give it a steam effect so that it can really get that crispy outside, and it gets really good. So you're going to put your lid back on, shut your oven, and you're going to go ahead and set your timer for for 25 minutes. You're going to bake it for 25 minutes with the lid on, and then you're going to take the lid off for another 25 to 30 minutes. When you take your lid off, the timing is going to depend on the internal temperature of your bread. So you do need to check the internal temperature. I just use a meat thermometer or my cheese thermometer. Stick it in the center of your bread at the highest point and check to see. You are looking for your bread inside to be 205 degrees or higher. This is going to give you the best bread and not gummy. Now, gluten-free bread always has slight gumminess. Always does. There's no way around it. The first day, I really don't taste it too much. After that, it does happen, and that's just gluten-free bread. But if it's not 205 degrees or higher internally, your bread is not completely done, and you're going to get gumminess right from the get-go. So, 25 minutes with the lid on, then remove the lid, and 25 to 30 minutes. At 25 minutes, I check the internal temperature, and I let it go for another 4 or 5 minutes after that if it's not at 205. Okay, so we are right at 205 internally. I just used my cheese thermometer to check that. I did have to put it in for about 7 additional minutes. So I was at 25 minutes with the lid off. I checked the internal temperature and it was at about 190. So I put it in for another 5, checked it again, and we were like 195. And so I got pretty much to 7 minutes extra, so I would say with the lid off, that was 32 minutes, and it was at 205. So now you want to remove your bread very carefully out of your pan and put it on a wire rack. Okay, so I got it onto my wire rack, and you are going to let it cool completely before you slice it. I know this is really hard to do, but look at how good it looks. You can feel the crunchiness on the top, and we're going to slice into it as soon as it is cool. So, go get yourself some gluten-free sourdough bread. I will link the sourdough starter in the description, but this is our best gluten-free sourdough bread that we love, and it's been long awaited, but I hope you guys enjoy it as much as we do, and we'll see you next time. Take care.